welcome to Next Gen Finance, an SEB podcast about sustainable finance. My name is Lina Apsheva, I am your host, and today I am joined in the studio by Johan Florén, the head of ESG and Communication at the Swedish pension fund AP7. In addition to his role at AP7, Johan is also part of the Taskforce for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, TNFD, which has recently published its recommendations for investors and corporates. In this episode, Johan and I will talk about the Swedish pension system and how the AP funds work with questions around sustainability and nature. Of course, we will also dive into TNFD, and Johan will share his insights into this groundbreaking framework that will help organizations better understand and report their impacts and dependencies on nature. So, Johan, warm welcome to the studio. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't we just jump right in, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and especially your role at AP7?
Yeah, I work at AP7 with ESG and Communication, and I started in 2009, so I've been there for 14 years now. When you think about sustainability, which is going to be the main topic, we are strong believers in the responsibility of the finance industry and asset owners in particular to use their influence as owners and try to make a contribution to sustainable development.
That sounds great. And I'm sure that our Swedish listeners will be familiar with what the AP funds are, but our international listeners maybe not so much. So could you tell us a little bit about the AP funds and the Swedish pension system?
There are 6 AP funds. 5 of them are within the income pension system, which is a pay-as-you-go system, and they are a buffer there, you might say. So it's sort of to smooth things out when there's, there are good years and bad years, and to smooth the pensions out a little bit, they are just part of the system there. We are part of the premium pension system, which is a funded system, and we are the default alternative in there. And there are hundreds of private funds that you can choose from, but if you choose not to or just don't do anything, you end up with AP7.
So you said that there are 6 AP funds and you come
Yes.
from AP7. So that's the thing that distinguishes, I guess, you from the
we're
6.
we're in one system and all the others are in another system. And we have about 1,000 billion, that would be somewhere a little less than 90 billion euros or dollars asset under management, and somewhere around 5.5 million Swedes have their money with us.
So when I think about my pension, for example, I'm in my late 20s, right? So it's not in the near future, but when I also think about climate change, obviously it's something that's going to affect the future and me when I'm a pensioner. And when you think about it in those terms, you of course can't ignore the connection between the pension funds and sustainability. So I'm wondering, what is your mandate around sustainability? You touched on this a little bit, but could you elaborate on how you work with it?
Our official mandate has been there since the beginning in 2000, and we were required to take the wording and back in those days were to take environment and ethics into consideration. And now they change, for us, they changed January in 2023, and for the buffer funds a couple of years earlier. And now we basically have the same mandate, but we are sort of it's in our guidelines to be more ambitious. In our case, we are very outspoken universal owners, so we sort of own a small part of the system. And that means that we are taking systemic risks into particular consideration. We think it's a privilege to be able to do that, because if you have a more concentrated portfolio, you probably have to work with the companies you own, and you have to take a more narrow perspective. I mean, both are relevant and necessary, but we can work with the systemic challenges and we try to do the most out of that.
And I know that you have this climate action plan for, is it helping reach net zero globally by
Yeah.
2050? I mean, that sounds great. Could you tell us a little more about this plan?
This for us, this started in 2021 in May, actually, when IEA came with a roadmap for net zero. We all already took the Paris Agreement into our norm base in 2016 when it was launched and agreed, and have been using it as a part of our active ownership since then. But this whole systematic work against a net zero ambition for 2050 for the whole society was very much helped and guided by this roadmap from IEA, because it's much more specific, both what different sectors have to do and at what point, etc., than anything that has been presented before. It's also a type of organization behind it, which have a global reach and authority, you might say. So it's a great place to start. A lot of people look at it, and that means that we don't do a lot of separate initiatives, that we can sort of help this for collaboration. And the whole net zero ambition is something that has a vast acceptance today among companies and among investors. So it's something that's happening, but it still is open what path that companies and investors would take there. So when this roadmap from IEA came, the path became clearer. And we thought that was an excellent opportunity. 2 days later, this was in May 18th, 2 days later, May 20th, the Investor Agenda, which is an initiative with all the biggest organizations around sustainable investing, PRI and IIGCC and Ceres, etc. They've joined together and they put out something they call the Expectation Ladder, which is a very clear document how to structure and how to implement this for an investor. And this was the other document that we thought that these two are excellent in combination, because one is looking at the real world sort of, and the other one is looking what are investors supposed to do and how to structure it. So we took them, and one part of that, I mean, in the acronym was an ICAP, Investor Climate Action Plan. And we took this and as a starting point, and then we started to develop our own plan and what kind of contributions we could do within investing, within active ownership, within policy advocacy, around transparency, etc. And this became the action plan that we build everything on. And also in 2022, there was an initiative for Paris-aligned asset owners to start reporting on the progress and the progress in the real economy. We, gave them our numbers, and this was put into a report that was released about a year ago, and that was the first one. So I think this will also help to sort of unify all efforts to become more and more synchronized and therefore more effective.
The plan is published on your website, right? So I
Yes.
encourage anyone who's interested to go and have a look, because it really shows the pioneering approach that AP7 has in this case. But
And I would also encourage, because this is a process that is much bigger than us. So, and there's nobody have the end target. Even if you have the end target, the way is there is under development, and it's a collaborative efforts among investors, and of course in the next step among companies too. So having a dialogue and sort of being a part of this journey is helping everybody.
I do want to go back to something you said a little earlier about systemic risks. And I think just maybe 5 years ago, when we would think about systemic risks, they would oftentimes revolve around the question of climate, right? And then nature and biodiversity all of a sudden came into the picture. And since we will be talking about TNFD, I'm wondering, how do these topics fit into your approach at AP7?
If you look at climate, the investor community has been involved with this for some years now, and the world outside the finance industry even longer. So it's not a new topic, and there's a lot of scientific data, and there are models and metrics and methodologies, etc. So in this way, you might say that you don't have a blueprint. I wouldn't go so far, because there are certain particular differences between biodiversity and climate. But still, there's a lot of innovation and thinking that has already taken place, and that can be very useful. So this is the good thing, and it's also, the climate is more or less on everybody's awareness today, and this means that you can easily, since they are so connected, it's not going to be like you have to break through a whole different new area. It's more like relating one to the other. So there are a lot of opportunities around that. Then, of course, you have to be aware that in some particular ways, the challenge is very different. But if you look at it from a sort of a human existential perspective, they are very much connected. We won't be able to solve climate without taking biodiversity into account, for example.
Yes, and I would like to reiterate that point about the connectedness between the biodiversity, nature, and climate change, in a sense that they're not only connected in the way we solve them, but also in the way that they may become worse or affect us in a negative way. So, changing climate affects biodiversity loss and vice versa. So it's definitely an extremely important topic to be considered. And I can also say that for us at the bank, I work a lot with large corporates, for example. This development, such as the Taskforce for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, is a huge step, because now we have actually a framework for how we can advise our clients to look into these issues, where before it was a bit of a, you had to solve these things on a case-by-case basis, kind of, especially since biodiversity is such a local issue, as opposed to climate.
This is really one of the main values created, I think, with TNFD. So your description is exactly where the problem was, and hopefully this will be at least a keystone to solving that problem.
And with that, I would really like to ask you to elaborate on what TNFD actually is, in case we have some listeners that maybe have not even ever heard of the term.
TNFD is, you could say, in principle, it's a voluntary framework, a global voluntary framework. If you look at the practice, it's a task force where we have been one of 40 organizations, and we have been working for 2 years. So we started in 2021, and the participants, the members of the task force, are everything from asset owners as us, and from the beginning we were the only asset owner and the only Swede. Then the Norwegian MBIM oil fund also joined, so they've been a part of it too. Then you have a lot of the biggest banks in the world and biggest asset owners. Another group is big global companies like Bungie or Nestle, or that are relevant for biodiversity. And then the third category is service providers, such as the biggest auditing companies and rating agencies and things like that. So 40 altogether that has been working very intensely. It has been so many work streams and sort of working with different parts of this. that have put this framework together. And the framework is supposed to be a tool both for assessing your risks and your dependencies and your impact, etc., opportunities, of course, but also for reporting. But they are not necessarily connected. So you might do an assessment that is more in-depth than you actually report, and this is on purpose. And one key benefit, of course, is that this might help to get a better comparability, both for assessing your own things and if you're an investor and owner for assessing different companies. It's also thought of as a link between the global biodiversity framework that was the Kunming-Montreal Agreement from 2022, which is sort of the same thing as the Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement was climate, this was biodiversity. And it's thought of as a link down to everything from reporting standards like ISSB or GRI or things like that, but also for legislation, for example, in EU or in other parts. And of course, as a tool for companies, just to get a better perception on what risks are we actually exposed to and how can we manage them and how can we contribute to lessen our negative impact, for example. So if you go into the website, it's like a resource archive there's a lot of thinking, and it has been, when it started in 2021, there was a number of beta versions that were launched, and it was a huge number of consultation processes along the way with companies, with academics, with organizations, etc. So it's very, very well anchored in reality, and I think this is one of the great achievements. So it's supposed to combine usability. In the end, if the companies don't use it, it's not, the success is sort of, when it's been used. On the other end, it has to be, has a strong academic base, and it has to be very thorough and well thought through, etc. So there's a dynamic between creating something that is perfect, but that nobody uses, or something that is very usable, but too simplistic or not actually doing the job. So it has been put a lot of effort to sort of meet both those dimensions of what we try to achieve.
Definitely, it's a fine balance, and I'm extremely impressed by you and the other task force members who've put all this time and effort and the expertise into actually developing this framework that can then really impact not only the sustainable finance market, but the global market in general. And there's another such framework, the predecessor, you can say the Taskforce on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD, that came before TNFD, of course. And actually, we here in the bank often refer to TCFD as the backbone of the sustainable finance market in a way. So I'm wondering, what are the similarities and the differences between the two?
Naturally, it was a big inspiration when we started, and it has been a clear ambition to sort of develop something as close as possible to make it easier for anyone who starts to sort of recognize what's going on. And one of the most obvious similarities is when you look at the reporting guidance, where you have, in the TNFD, it's 14 categories, but it's the same 4 pillars. And in 11 of the required reporting points are exactly the same as TSFD. So there will be 3 novel ones within the TNFD that depends on the topic sort of is different, so we had to put some more dimensions to it, you might say.
Just thinking about the immense work that went into developing this framework, I'm wondering if you could give us a bit of an insight into the kind of behind the scenes of TNFD, and what did your day-to-day involvement as a task force member look like?
Well, as I said, it was a lot of work groups and work streams, and nowadays the natural place to do this is online, of course. So it was, I wouldn't say endless, but a lot of Teams meetings, and then of course a couple of real life meetings too for the task force. It was also a secretariat with about 20 people that were more or less experts, everybody in some particular area of this. That was a big help. And I mean, we were very different organizations. So we have a lot of money that we manage, or as an asset owner, but we don't have a lot of people. So we had to put together a work group. So it's me and a couple of my colleagues. And in some of the other organizations, I know they were working like half time with this for 2 years as a part of their assignment there. And I mean, it's challenging since we have such different perspectives on what we're doing. We're sort of at one end, we more or less own everything. 50 markets, all industries, companies of all types. And therefore, we have a very systemic perspective on what's going on and what we think is important. On the other hand, you have the individual companies who really they are the ones who carry the physical risk immediately every day. And they are also, as you know, going to have to bear the burden of reporting, which is a big debate going on. And for a good reason, I think. I mean, the reporting has to be developed continuously for avoiding not just adding more and more and more and more. So at the same time as you come up with something better, you should take something away, I think. And one helpful thing with this, of course, is when, for example, investors unite, so everybody doesn't ask for different things or in different ways. And there's another great value with TNFD, I think, that if everybody can agree on this, it's going to be much easier for the companies to know what is expected of us. And on our part, everybody doesn't have to invent the wheel. We can just go there and sort of unite around a standard.
Definitely. And I remember listening to the TNFD launch webinar and hearing that TNFD really strives to kind of be an addition to the existing frameworks in a sense, and not kind of create this additional load on top of them. And that's definitely something that we hear a lot from clients, especially when CSRD is something that's a huge topic right now, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, that all companies will have to report according to. And oftentimes you hear about how difficult it is, right, to consider all the different similarities and the differences between these type of reporting, but also TNFD, for example. And maybe I should mention that CSRD is an EU directive, so it's the companies in the EU that will have to report according to it. So I'm wondering, what's your view on this kind of synergy between regional directives such as CSRD and TNFD, and what is the expectation placed on companies in this sense?
I think what everybody's hoping for is to get all these different frameworks more synchronized. And in the end, a very beautiful day, there will only be one framework that covers everything everywhere. That's far away in the future, of course. And if, to be honest, there's also another part of this that is actually working in the other direction, is that everybody has different circumstances where they act. So it's like a combination. You have to have the global framework, but then you have a flexibility for local differences. And this is in particular relevant for TNFD, since the topic is biodiversity in nature. And biodiversity in nature is very local. So the whole idea of just taking the climate perspective and put it on this topic doesn't work. Because, I mean, climate is one thing, it's greenhouse gases more or less. And it's the same everywhere, and you can measure the same thing. Here it's all kinds of different things and all kinds of different ecosystems and biomes and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that's also a task for us, in a sense, at the bank, to think of how we can integrate biodiversity and nature into the financial products such as green bonds, sustainability-linked bonds, etc. Because, we can't just tie it to the number of greenhouse gases that you put out into the atmosphere. Yeah, so a big work ahead. All right, Johan, thank you so much for explaining all of this. I mean, I have so many more questions, and I think that there's so much more to discuss, but our time, unfortunately, is limited. So maybe we'll have to invite you back at some point so we can talk in more detail about, for example, the differences between the reporting types and et cetera, et cetera. But before I let you go, I do want to ask you if you have a piece of advice for people working in the financial industry, or maybe even in corporate professionals who are looking into TNFD and beginning to look into this type of reporting. Do you have any advice on what they should consider?
Yes. The TNFD has even launched a piloting campaign, you might call it. I mean, there has already been a lot of pilot testing during the process with all the beta versions, but now it's real, sort of. So we're going to do this, and I encourage everybody to do this, and it's to start reporting with the realization from the start that it's impossible to do it extensively and perfectly, and there's a great lack of information today. It's going to take several years before we get something that actually is, covers most things. But don't wait for that, because you can be part of this process, and that's how we perceive our own role too. We're not going to be able to answer everything, but we can start with our own position and try to do what's possible today, and then we will try to be very open about it. This is what we could do, and this was not possible, for example, due to lack of data, which is one of the big challenges if you're an investor. But don't wait for it, and don't take I mean, there's so much interest around regulation and different type of required reporting, etc., that sort of creates an anxiety around compliance and things like that. And that put the focus on just not doing any mistakes anywhere, and which is very harmful in the way that you avoid everything which is not fully clarified yet. And so my message is embrace this lack of clarity, and let's help each other to clarify.
I couldn't agree more. And this is exactly where the phrase, "we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good," is
Exactly.
on point, I think.
Yes.
So, Johan, again, thank you so much for joining us and providing your insights. And thank you all for listening in today. As always, don't forget to like or subscribe or add to favorites, depending on where you're listening to, so you're notified when new episodes come out. And you can always reach out to us at nextgenfin@seb.se with questions or suggestions for future episodes. But for now, take care and goodbye.